Hi everyone, I'm Mark Harrison and this is a history of Rome. Last week we heard how Rome concluded its first treaty with Carthage in the hope of better securing its position, but how by the mid-490s BC it was once more in a time of constant warfare. We heard that not only was it battling with its traditional foes the Sabines, but it was also facing further problems with cities in Latium that looked to break free from Roman hegemony, and that these foes were joined by antagonists from the Volsci and Aurunci tribes. We also heard how the Senate looked to deal with the military crises through the creation of a new magistracy, the dictator, and how it helped Rome to once more overcome its enemies and survive. Let's continue. Since its refounding as a republic, Rome had known little in the way of peace. 495 BC had witnessed a great victory for the Romans when they had defeated a league of rebellious Latin cities at the Battle of Lake Regillus, before then moving even further south under the consul Publius Servilius Priscus Structus to deal with a possible threat from the Volsci. In this endeavour too, they were entirely successful, cowering the Volsci with minimum casualties. On the surface, the success of the Republic, both domestically and in its foreign policy, seemed to be as a result of the unique system of cooperation between the ruling patrician class and the majority plebeians. But under the surface, there were problems, one of which was now to come to the fore. Its resolution would fundamentally change the workings of the Roman state forever, as well as creating unforeseen conditions that would challenge future generations of Roman statesmen. Livy recounts the story of an old man, dirty and thin, with long straggly hair and an unkempt beard, who went to the Forum and appealed to the people to listen to him. Many recognised him as a former army officer, a veteran of many wars that had been fought to keep Rome safe. They wondered how such a man of honour could have come to such dire circumstances. A willing audience, they listened to his tale. He told that during the conflict with the Sabines, the enemy had ravaged the land where he had a house. This house they had burnt down after they had pillaged his possessions and stolen his cattle. Having lost his property, he found that he was unable to pay the new taxes that were then being levied on the Roman people. In his desperation to solve the problem, he went to the moneylenders and borrowed what he needed. But the interest rates were so high that soon he found himself unable to pay back the money that he owed. His debt soon spiralled out of control, and his creditors forced him to give up firstly his grandfather's farm and then that of his father. Eventually, his own final property was taken, leaving him homeless and penniless. Now destitute, his creditors took him to prison, whereupon he was whipped and threatened with death. To illustrate the point, he showed the crowd the whip marks which lay alongside his battle scars. The people who heard the tale became outraged, and as the story spread through the city, that outrage grew, for they knew that this was not an isolated incident. Debt was a systemic problem among the plebeian class. Many of those who listened to the old man had themselves fallen foul of the moneylenders and their usury, or knew people who had. And as the anger grew, and word spread, more and more debtors came to the Forum looking for the protection of the crowd, which had by now swelled greatly in number. Servilius and his fellow consul Appius Claudius Sabinus Regilensis now attended the Forum, whereupon the people demanded that the Senate be convened to address their grievances. But the size and the temper of the mob frightened many of the senators who refused to come. Those that did so were too few in number to allow for a decision to be made. The people believed that this was a trick on behalf of the Senate to prevent their demands from being heard. Tensions thus increased further, and it became clear to the senators that there could be wider violence. In the end, this prospect finally forced them to come in enough numbers to start a debate. Convening the Senate was one thing though. Getting it to make a decision was something entirely different. The consuls had very differing ideas as to how to handle the issue. Servilius looked to placate the people by offering them a concession that would be big enough to get them to disperse. Appius, on the other hand, sought a much more hardline solution. He wanted the gathering to be crushed and the people to be cowed into submission. The Senate, unable to choose between the two options, was paralysed by indecision. It was at this point, with tension simmering on all sides of the debate, that something unlooked for occurred. A lone rider from Latium entered the city. He came bearing news that Latin territory had been invaded by the Volsci, and that he had been tasked with coming to Rome to seek military assistance. For the Senate, this was an ideal opportunity to put the debt problem to bed by focusing the people's attention on a potential external threat. The rider's request was duly granted, and the consuls prepared for war. But the people were not so easily moved from their position. They simply refused to enlist until their grievances had been addressed. Now in a difficult position, the Senate tasked Servilius with persuading them. He told them that the Senate had been in earnest debate, looking for a solution to alleviate their concerns, and that it was only with the invasion of the Volsci and the Latins' subsequent request for aid that the debate had ceased. He implored them to put aside their differences temporarily so that they could all unite against a common enemy. He then threw them a bone. Servilius declared an edict that no citizen would be stopped from enlisting by either being chained or imprisoned. To that, he added that no serving soldier would be subject to having his goods seized or sold, nor would his children or grandchildren be arrested. The people felt assured by Servilius' proclamation and the immediate release of the prisoners, and they stepped forward in droves to take the oath. Once committed to the cause, the citizens of Rome were more than capable of fulfilling their obligations to defend the state. The army marched south and was successful in its campaign against the Volsci. It also inflicted significant defeats upon the Aurunci and the Sabines. Once these external threats had been dealt with, the men returned to Rome. But if there was any expectation by the Senate that the debt issue had been forgotten, that notion was quickly dispelled. No sooner had the citizens been released from their oath than they were once again demanding that action be taken to address their problems. But instead of honouring the edict of Servilius and to look at longer-term solutions to the issue at hand, the Senate reneged on its agreement. A new decree was instead issued by the hawkish Appius that sent all previously released debtors back into the hands of their creditors, and this in addition to sundry other people being taken into custody as was seen fit. One detainee, backed by the crowd, appealed directly to Servilius to honour his promises. He demanded that he bring the whole matter up once more before the Senate. Servilius relented. The senators were, however, no longer in the mood to tolerate the wishes of an unruly mob. They openly berated Servilius for his weakness in not decisively dealing with those causing the trouble. They had swung fully behind Appius. Servilius was now in the unenviable position of being loathed by both sides. To the Senate, he was weak and a populist. To the people, he was a breaker of his word who had betrayed their trust. Having used an iron fist, and now believing the crisis with the populace in general was over, the ruling class moved on and turned its attention to matters of its own concern, specifically the dedication of the new temple to Mercury. They were, as was so often the case, deadlocked, unable to decide which of the two consuls should have the honour. This was significant, as the man chosen would also have the right to preside over the markets, establish a merchants' guild, and would exercise the not insignificant powers of Pontifex Maximus. Unable to break this deadlock, the senators decided to refer the issue to the popular assembly. And it was at this point that they realised that the divisive issue of debt had not gone away. For once convened, the people voted in a way that sent a strong signal to the patricians. Ignoring the consuls, the assembly chose a senior officer from the legions, Marcus Latorius, for the honour. It was a clear slight to the Senate, whose members were utterly furious. But their anger was impotent, for the people could not be persuaded against their choice. The meeting now began to deteriorate. Further fuel was added to the fire when some debtors were seen being led away to the courts. Pandemonium ensued and finally violence as the crowd moved to protect the debtors and to strike at the creditors. The consuls had lost control and the meeting broke up in anarchy. Now, sometime later, Rome became aware that the Sabines were once more looking a likely threat. To deal with it, the Senate enacted the usual decree for the enlistment of the people into the army. But the decree was not abided by. Nobody came forward. An angry Appius levelled his frustration yet again at his co-consul, blaming his previous weakness for the boldness of the people to defy the authority of the state. He then sent out the lictors to arrest one of the main ringleaders. But upon being seized, the man simply claimed his right to an appeal. Desperately, Appius attempted to prevent the appeal from being heard, but in this he was unsuccessful. And so, despite the potential threats to Rome, the paralysis of its military arm dragged on for the rest of the consular year, with the people steadfastly refusing to undertake military service and the consuls and senate refusing to deal with a debt issue to the satisfaction of the people. Rome was clearly in crisis as the desperation of the plebeians clashed with the obstinacy of the patricians. It was a crisis that crucially left the city undefended. It was only a matter of time before one of their neighbours would look to exploit this vulnerability. If you like our work, please help by subscribing, pressing the bell button and commenting. And we'll see you next time on A History of Rome.